So some of you may know that I got married this summer and we are going on our honeymoon in about 2.5 weeks. So I ordered this lovely dusty rose chiffon from destashify.com, which is a wonderful website. I'm debating selling on it soon. And I am going to make myself a dress for the honeymoon. The very funny part is that I just got an ad for Joann's and thought, meh, I don't need anything from there. I don't have any lining fabric and chiffon is kind of see-through, so I think I'm gonna be making a trip to Joann's today. I have the Do a pattern from This Is Kachi, and I'm gonna use this more as a guideline. I'm not gonna have a lacing panel, I wanna have shirring in the back, and I'm probably gonna merge these two into one. I'm gonna do a mock-up from some scrap fabric, and then I'm probably gonna have to go buy some lining. I learned from my quick mock-up that I need to add about 1 inch to the arm side, and that I would like to raise the neckline just a little bit. And from Joann's, I got 2 yards of this rather close satin. It was on super clearance, so it was $4 a yard. I also got this black sequin in the remnants bin. It's great because I have a project in mind that is gonna be a fairly simple black dress, but with this, it can be fancy. I added seam allowance by taping 2 pens together and tracing along the pattern edge. I also marked the bust and waist curves, which of course I ironed away before I could use them. I lined up some of the flowers on the center front bodice and trimmed roughly around it for now. I did the same for the other bodice pieces, but since chiffon is so slippery, I chose to baste the 2 layers together before trimming it to size. I flatlined the 2 fabrics by running a basting stitch around the edges, and from now on they will act as one. Everything was in desperate need of some ironing, which removed my helpful but also heat erasable pen marks. I know you can throw the pieces into the snow to make them come back, but this is a tropical dress and not a snow dress. Now that the chiffon can't escape, I trimmed the edges to fit the satin. I pinned the pieces together without the alignment marks, but with lots of experience I eased the princess seams around the bust. You know, I don't think I've said where we're going yet. We're going to St. Lucia! As much as I love snow and winter activities, it will be nice to feel warm again. So, I don't normally sew over pins, but this is chiffon, and chiffon is a slippery nightmare, so I'm making an exception. I tried this on yesterday and I'm going to need to take in the bust a little bit. There's just too much fabric here and it was causing the straps to just fall off. So I'm going to adjust that, and I think I'm also going to have to remove the back panels because I don't think this much of the shirred stuff is going to be enough to get it over my head. I removed that last panel and unpicked the top 4 inches around the bust, drew a new neckline from my mark, trimmed it off, and sewed it up again. And then I pressed my seams on a chiffon-friendly heat setting. There will be no melting on my watch. I made a lining off screen because I wanted this to be as thin as possible, but also the chiffon was fraying too much, so I caved. I stitched the layers around the neckline except very close to the strap edge on the armpit side. I clipped the curves and turned it right side out before pinning the strap ends. I sewed across the lining and the straps all at once. This leaves the strap mostly finished, it just needs one slightly out of focus invisible stitch. I chose not to understitch the lining down, so I gave it a good pressing instead. For the shirred back panel, I cut a big rectangle and folded it at the top edge, and marked guidelines 1 inch apart. I have elastic shirring thread in my bobbin and regular thread at the top, and I got to stitching! And slowly I remembered that I have never gotten this machine to shirr properly. That was my first machine. Ugh. After recutting the back panel, I tried again with 1/4 inch elastic, stretching it while sewing a zigzag stitch. I continued doing this 1 inch apart for the whole panel. I also digitized this freestanding lace hibiscus from my hair. Here is my stretchy panel. I stitched it to one side of the bodice and pinned it to the other side so I could try it on. Well, this is awful. This is supposed to be like that, but if I have it pinned so where it fits here, I cannot fit it over my head. So, I guess I will be taking out the panel and going with a zipper. I made new panels the same way as before and stitched them to the back, and I was starting to get a bit frustrated. Time to cut the skirt, and maybe be less frustrated with it, I hope. I traced the bottom of the bodice and measured down about 20 inches. After cutting out the front, I used it as a pattern to cut out the back, but with a flat waist and added seam allowance on the back. I cut the same pieces from the chiffon. And I let everything hang for a few days to let the bias stretch. I'm working on a really big project right now, and this is supposed to be a break from that project. It is Cinderella's petticoat, made entirely from recycled fabrics, and I have just been utterly drowning in ruffles and frills, and it was driving me nuts. So, to take a break from all those ruffles, I decided to do a project that requires more ruffles. Yay. I'm going to cut the medium ruffle now, and the circumference of this is 80 inches, and in general you want ruffles to be between 2 and 3 times the length they're going around. So I went with 2.5, which leaves me at 200 inches of ruffle. I think this fabric is 58 inches wide, which means I need 3.5 lengths times, I want 10 inches, but I'm gonna cut 12 just in case. So I'm gonna cut a foot times 4 of the length of this fabric. Oh, to keep this on grain. No. It's the great thing about woven fabrics. They rip. Now I have a straight line to cut against. I sewed these together into a giant and non-Mobius loop. These edges won't fray because they're on the selvage, but they are ugly, so I trimmed them down and turned them into French seams by stitching them on the other side. But just barely, bobbin chicken for the win! I ran a long stitch with a high tension to gather the top edge. I gathered each panel independently so I could adjust them later. Do you know what this dress still needs? Pockets! I freehanded a phone-sized side seam pocket. On my fiber optic dress, I made the handhole too small, so I made sure to avoid that this time. I cut out 4 of these. I pinned each pocket shape into the side seam of both layers of the skirt. I basted the top of the skirt pieces together before sewing all 4 pockets into the side seams. I understitched the seam allowance of the pocket side to keep it from poking out too much. I pinned around the pockets but not down the side seam because those are going to be separate seams. The chiffon is getting the first half of a French seam now, before stitching up and around the pocket and down the second part of the French seam of the chiffon, but not of the satin. This is how I was planning on putting pockets into my 2-layer wedding dress, but I'd never done it before and was too short on time to learn how. My fiber optic reception dress had pockets for the battery packs, though. I pinned the skirt to the bodice starting at the point, and we're just going to ignore the fact that the side seams don't quite match up. Focus on the pockets. Lost my snips again. I clipped the center point and repeated that for the other side of the skirt. I ironed the invisible zipper open before pinning it and basting it to the back. Basting keeps it from shifting under the invisible zipper foot. I hand-stitched the lining in, and we have a short and unhemmed dress. Time for ruffles! Again. I evened out the hem with my chalk hem marker. You can see part of a hem marker on this dress form, but I tripped over that years ago and it broke. Before I started adding ruffles, I serged and turned up the satin hem. I pinned the ruffle to the skirt. So I just discovered that the travel agency spelled my name wrong on the flights, and I'm 99.9% certain that has to match your passport for international travel, so at this rate, it might just be Patrick on a tropical island, and me stuck in the cold in this dress. And we have a medium-length dress. I cut 7-inch strips for the final ruffle. These were sewn into a giant strip, but not into a loop because I wasn't sure how much I'd need before sewing it on because I didn't precisely calculate the gathering. This ruffle is made up of 10 58-inch panels, which you'd think would be enough, but each one was gathered from 58 inches to 16 inches and it was not. How short was I? Almost 2 yards. Sigh. The next day I made 4 more panels to fill in that gap and closed up the back. And now it is time to battle with my nemesis, the rolled hem foot. There are 21 yards to be hemmed on this dress. And do you know how many rolled hems are in my Cinderella petticoat? I have used almost 2,000 yards of thread so far. But anyway, this dress is done, and the only question is, will I actually make it to the island? that was a wonderful vacation. We had a delightful honeymoon, and I got a souvenir. When we got home last night, Emmy was super excited to see me, and she gave me a big greeting. And then she was following me around, glaring at me for several hours, so she was quite mad that we left her. Don't click away yet, because I am going to show you some of the really awesome things that I found while snorkeling, including octopus. That was a new one for me, and cuttlefish too, actually. So sit back and relax and watch the rest of this video. Let's get to the snorkeling! I discovered my love of zooming through the water and looking at all the beautiful fish years and years ago, and Patrick loves treasure hunting while snorkeling, so this honeymoon was a no-brainer. If you want to see what he found, go watch his video. I was on the hunt for more fishy treasures, and I'll do my best to identify some of them. Also, all of these beautiful fish are making me want to have an aquarium again. We just had the most amazing honeymoon and such a wonderful time. Not surprisingly, I got very burnt on the first day, because I'm very pale, so you can see my long sleeves and pants. We were literally in the water from the moment we finished breakfast until dinner time, and only went to the buffet for lunch because it was faster, which meant that we got to go back in the water faster. We just had the most wonderful honeymoon ever, and we're very grateful to be able to go on such a trip. These guys are snake eels, and I also saw a moray eel but didn't get it on camera. He didn't like me watching him. These guys are white-spotted filefish, cool little dudes. And this wouldn't be a sewing channel without some needle fish. Don't worry, they aren't barracudas. However, this would be a barracuda. He's actually about 4 feet long and only looks small because it's a barracuda, and I stayed far away. There were a bunch of less threatening Caribbean spiny lobsters. My dad loves lobsters, so I tried to get him some good shots while staying far away from the sea urchins. I saw 2 whole schools of cuttlefish. The first was very pale, and the second was much darker, but they can change colors, so it might have just been the same bunch in a different mood on a different day. And this pile of sand? Just an octopus. Just kidding, of course. This was one of the coolest moments of my life. I didn't want to bother it too much, though. It was busy hunting. Also, it's like 16 inches in diameter here. And this is a tiny octopus hiding in a cup like coral. It's kind of hard to see, but it was an octopus. I chased what I thought was a 16-inch long pufferfish, but later I found out that it's a porcupine fish, which was not quite as cool, and I ripped my fin while chasing it. But hey, I still saw 2 octopus! Bye everybody!
Looking good, babe.